So, I've been asked to do an intro, so here's an intro. What I'm planning to do over the next, few weeks, or however long it takes, is just get down into the weeds in terms of what people term principles, underlying strategies, the parameters that are set for what we do, and hopefully what we do is practical Jiu-Jitsu. Never mind the style in which we do it. So we will record them, put them online so people can watch them later. We'll also make them freely available, so if anyone else wants to watch them, they can watch them. My instructor used to say to me that he wasn't too interested in having secrets, because it didn't matter how many times he told people things, though, how much they listen and take in anyway. So, in terms of where Jiu-Jitsu is at nowadays as well, I think really what we want to do is probably attract people, tell them what the underlying thought process is, and then hopefully people will think, well, that makes sense, that's attractive to me. I can see why I might want to do that, because it's a dying art in some respects. So even though there's a lot of things that people do that you would still call it Jiu-Jitsu, but they don't call it Jiu-Jitsu, they call it something else. But whatever. So, intro. What is it we're going to cover? Well, they talk about principle. Nice, it's a good start. Principles, underlying strategies, tactics not so much. The basis. I like the word parameters. Now, over the years, over the 30 whatever years, I've heard lots of people talk about the underlying principles. And you say, there's a seminar, or there's a website, or there's a grading material, or whatever. And we talk about the principles of Jiu-Jitsu. So good. Sounds good. Now, in my experience, from all sorts of levels, what this turns out to be is crap. And I'm not trying to pretend that I've got all the answers or that I am a genius, because it doesn't take a genius to get across the principles. What I mean by their crap is that they have esoterics, broad generalizations, and those things are not reflected in practice. And concrete examples, they're few and far between. So, what do I mean by that? What is the principle? Oh, we have the principle of Ju. Okay. This is like one of the easiest principles to come up with something concrete for. But the principles of Ju, and we talk about willow trees and the snow on the willow tree and all this type of stuff. And you go, how is that reflected in your practice? Let's show you some practical examples. What does that mean? And usually those practical examples don't do anything for this. Right? That's about as simple as you can get in Jujitsu. But the body position, the approach, the way that things are organised, the whole underpinnings of the way that you practice, that's gone astray. And then often that's written in something that's specious, it makes sense, but has little value. The snow on the willow tree bends, the snow falls on the ground. Great. It's not that hard to come up with a practical example of how that works. And they're few and far between. Oh, yin and yang. Great example. But then the talk goes off onto esoterics about it. If you can't, you don't have to be the master of the school. If you can't, even as an instructor, regurgitate, if you can't articulate a few of the principles of what it is that you teach, there's a bit of a problem. Don't get me started on teaching instructors. So, what I want to do in this series is cover some of what I prefer to call parameters. Why do I use parameters rather than principles? So, parameters. Let's go back 2 generations. My teacher's teacher. Right? Here he is here. He goes and he's interested in martial arts and he learns some Jujitsu here, he learns some Jujitsu there, he learns some other martial arts here. He lives in a context right, which includes, Second World War, Nazi occupation, and then colonial environment, and then 1950s to 2000s Australia. And based on all those things, he says to himself, what's important? Well, I think these things are important. I think these things aren't important. So with that, he produces what call it system 1. It might be system 10, it might be system 9, doesn't matter. System 1. So in this context, and of what he knows and what he thinks is important, he sets the parameters. I think we should train in this way. This is how realistic we need to train. This is how safely we can train. And system 1's accession, they all are. System 1 is an experiment, and it has result 1. Very good. My teacher is part of that experiment. He's part of that stuff. He has a slightly different context in which he lives. He sees these results. He learns these things. He says what's important. Yeah. He produces system 2. System 2 has these results. Now, of course, it's not usually this clear cut. Let's say here's me. Alright, put a frown there. I saw a bit of this. Yep. Saw a lot of that. Over here there's another man. Right? He's got another system here. I'm going to call this, he's got system Y. And he's, whatever, that's Y2. It's giving result 2. Okay? I've got that. Right? I've got my context. There's a lot more combat sports, there's a lot more participation in combat sports. It's coming in here. And I say, what's important? And these are essentially my parameters. And that's the basis of system 3. Now, eventually I will get result 3, and my students down here, very happy students there, and so on. So we all have to set our parameters. Some of those things you can say yes, these are principles or constraints in which I feel I need to stay. The law. What do we know about self-defense now? Certain thinkings about self-defense have come a long way. We're all practicing now a lot more combat sports. Well, I don't know about a lot more because they were popular in the past, but there's a great variety of them. The nature of those things has changed a fair bit. They've evolved as well. So we get these different parameters, these different principles, different ways of looking at things. Maybe we import them from somewhere, maybe we modify our thinking, all that kind of stuff. However, I should be able to articulate, hopefully, what those parameters or those underlying thought patterns were in those systems that I was taught, and I should definitely be able to articulate those underlying thought patterns and constraints and parameters of the system which I teach. So it can be extraordinarily surprising how important those things are in understanding what it is that you're doing, and if you understand them, they can really help you stay on track and to be able to answer questions to which you haven't been. How do I figure out the answer that I haven't been told this is the answer to this question? So this is why we're trying to teach underlying skills. Right? Skills, techniques. Techniques are answers to questions effectively. Okay. So here's technique 1. That's like saying the answer to question 1 is answer 1. Okay, good. 1 times 3 is 3. Okay. Answer to question 2 is answer 2. 3 times 3 is 9. Okay. I can remember that. The answer to question 3 is answer 3. 5 times 4 is 20. Okay? So, if I am teaching somebody maths, they now know 3 answers. What we want to teach over here is, how do you multiply things? Okay. How do you divide things? How do you add things? How do you subtract things? Okay. Now I get any question about multiplication, I use my skill of multiplication to give the answer. Now I know any question, I get any question about division, I give the division answer. Get a question about addition, question about subtraction. Okay. So, each one of these lets me answer a buttload of questions rather than one. Now, over here, what we're hoping, for people who use this model, is eventually, if I give you enough multiplication questions, right, eventually I'll work out multiplication. Okay. 2 approaches. Now there's a few things we want to talk about here about right and wrong. And that goes for these different approaches. Okay. Wrong. Right. So unfortunately, these things are contextual. Okay. Now, I over here on system 3 have a set of parameters. When I put them through this, I say, what's right, what's wrong? This is built into our model, so it's right in this case, it's wrong in that case. What's wrong in one case can be right in another. Which of those ways is a better way to learn multiplication? I don't know. What if you're 2 years of age? Maybe rote learning 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 2 is 2. Maybe that's better than trying to get your head around how is multiplication actually done in any different way than just remembering 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 1 is 2. Contextual. So, if I have a whole bunch of parameters in system 3, and there's another Jujitsu school over here, okay? He's got a different set of parameters. He's got system X. Yeah? If these things have totally different parameters, what's right and wrong here, it might be right over there, but it might be wrong over there. Now sometimes that's a bad thing, but sometimes you sort of say, well, there's a problem here. It doesn't come out with the same answer as me. Sometimes it's a good thing, because there is more than one way to skin a cat. He may work on, I work on a very much, there's always a knife parameter. He might live in a country that there's no knife, people don't take knives, it's against their religion to cut somebody, right? But they bash with a stick. Let's say getting bashed with a stick happens all the time, getting stabbed, very rare, okay? Well, he's going to have different parameters. He's going to build a different system, and that the way you approach certain things, if it's in congruence with the system that you've built, is going to give a different answer to different things. So he said, well, I'm aiming for context 1, he's aiming for context 2. Two different approaches. It's better though to have a systematic approach than it is to just be shooting darts all over the board, because I can't solve a problem. So I've got these contexts, I've got these parameters, I've got this method, this is how I do multiplication. Somebody asked me a multiplication question that I haven't seen before. But I've got a method of solving. I apply that method, I get a result. Right? And I hope that's right. Okay. Over here, he has a different method, right? He gets a result. Now it could be that the difference in this result is I defended being bashed with the stick. Okay, I've got the guy on the ground, I've wrestled the stick from him. Over here, he deflected the stick, disarmed the stick without putting the guy on the ground. Two different results. Which one is right or wrong? Well, depends on your context. Doesn't mean that he cannot now put the guy on the ground after he's taken the stick. Doesn't mean that over here I can't take the stick after I've freaking wrestled the guy to the ground. So, just because one set of parameters is different doesn't mean that one set of parameters is wrong. But having no parameters, having no method, means I either know the answer, 3 3s are 9, 150 times 17. Don't know. Got no answer for that one. Going to have to work out how to do multiplication. We'll go back to a very, very, very basic method of multiplication before I can work out that answer. So, this is just an intro, right? The idea here is that we will describe some of these parameters and some of the parameters that we think really underpin practical Jiu-Jitsu, and then how does that affect our Jiu-Jitsu? When do I know, what are the things, okay, yes, I can solve questions when they're asked, i.e. I get some sort of scenario that I'm not familiar with, but I've got the skills to try and cope with it. But also I can watch for, I've gone off on this tangent and, that's in competition with some of my underlying parameters. Do I need to revisit those parameters, or do I need to rethink what it is that I've what path I've gone down here? Could be either. It's only by, examining those parameters we can improve. That's how we improve systematically though. Right? People talk about Kaizen. There's another principle, Kaizen, continuous improvement. Okay? How have you improved in the last 15 years? I've done the same thing, but I've really knuckled down. Okay? That's fair enough. And I don't change anything though because it's tradition. We've got a tradition of Kaizen. Tradition of continuous improvement by not doing anything differently. That's a tad juxtaposition-ish. But it doesn't mean that we lightly skip over those parameters that we believe exist. So what we really want is our Jujitsu to be like physics. Okay? Originally, there was no physics. There was magic. And religion. Probably. But then we worked out that, water goes downhill. Things are bust at certain times, right? Friction equals heat, equals fire. Very good. Some stage, someone said, gravity. Sitting on the old apple tree. Action, reaction. Alright. So around here we have, martial arts, hopefully, maybe last week, depending on what you're doing. Over here we have, martial arts a long time ago. Around here we've got, let's say we've got, what my instructor's instructor was taught. Okay. And he worked on problems, and then we came out, E equals MC squared. Oosh. System 1. At some stage, maybe the low-hanging fruit is part of the system. There's some basics that if this is going to be at all practical, we need these physics problems to be solved. Right? I'm not talking about going to the moon, right? But we might be, how are we going to actually describe the universe? Maybe you have to get to E equals MC squared before you're on the right track. So should another species be out there somewhere, they've got to get to that before certain things can happen. Okay? Right. Over here then we might have some further innovations. We've got system 2. Down here we've got system 3. And eventually we want our Jiu-Jitsu to go like this. Right? We want all of these rules though, like physics, we don't know anything for sure. These are rules that are not disproved. Now, a good scientific approach is that people should be able to attack that rule hard, and they may find that the rule doesn't hold, right? They may find there's exceptions to that rule. This rule is excellent, however, there is this group of atoms that behave in a strange way. Does that mean that this rule is no longer at all applicable? Does that mean that this rule is now 50-50? Does that mean that this rule needs further expansion? So we want to work on our Jiu-Jitsu all the time like this. We want to know what these rules are, and we should be able to attack these rules hard, and they should hold. And if they don't hold, then they need rethinking, modification. And eventually we want to go, oh, we've got these things that are exceptions. How do we explain them? Okay. One of the things I like to talk about in this sort of thing is sacrifice throws. How does the idea of sacrificing your position fit in with all the rest of the rules that we have? And okay, maybe this one here needs its own explanation, but that explanation is going to be scientific, not esoteric. And so we want to work on our underlying parameters in our Jiu-Jitsu to be scientific, to be robust. So that's the end of the intro. Hopefully Video Man will put these in some sort of playlist, some sort of logical order. Sometimes there is a hierarchy of things and sometimes there isn't. So that is end of intro.